Bill Berge here? Is Bill Berge here? Would you please whistle? Thank you. Good evening. The first announcement is important to somebody. There's a black pickup outside with the lights on. So if you don't turn them off, it will become historical. If you could all make your way to your seats, we'll start the program. We have quite a turnout tonight. The exhibit of nude photography was just a hoax to get you here. We actually have other speakers. Michelle, don't go away. I'm going to introduce Michelle Johnson, who's going to recruit you for some nefarious cause. So with no more further ado, and I'm sure no more introduction needed, I'll turn it over to Michelle.
Hello all. I don't know if you're all aware of it, but the Topanga Historical Society backed this great fundraiser this year, the Topanga Philharmonic Orchestra. Probably a lot of you were involved with as part of the Topanga Co-op preschool when your kids were there. And you know it's a lot of work if you did that, but it's also a huge payoff. And this year we could really use it for the Historical Society because Topanga Story is now completely out of print. Every copy's been sold, and it takes a huge outlay to make another printing of it. And that's been the main source of the day-to-day payment for expenses for the Historical Society and for the office that Ami Kirby runs and the museum. So it's a huge opportunity for us to be able to do it with the Historical Society. So we need a lot of commitment. It happens April 27th this year. And those of you who don't know, it's Guido Lamel, who's the premier violinist with the LA Philharmonic. He's the one who is the conductor, and he pulls together a great group of musicians. A lot of them are LA Philharmonic musicians, and a lot of great ones from the Canyon here too. And it's the first event of the Theatricum of the year. It's a beautiful springtime event. We're going to try to see if we can have other musicians on the lawn. There'll be food. It'll be a wonderful event. But because of all this, we do need some help. And we have most of the committee head positions filled, but not all of them, including some key ones like the head of the cleanup committee. And we also, and some other ones that, I know there's a lot of artists connected to the Topanga Historical Society. We don't have anyone in charge of decorating the stage right now. That might be a fun one that maybe some of you guys can get involved with. So anyway, I've got a sign-up sheet here, or 3 sign-up sheets. Excuse me. And each of them are different, actually. They're all different jobs on each sheet, so you might want to page through them. I'm going to just sort of send them around and look and see where your fit is. But if we could get everybody to do even something, it would just be a tremendous help, because this is especially true that many hands make light work on this particular project, because it needs a lot of work. So thanks a lot, and you'll be hearing from me more as it gets closer to that date. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. For those of you who value your time more than your money, you can talk to Ami or Pearl. Ami and Pearl, would you stand up? You can see them to join the Historical Society, and you will get one of these nifty brochures, which will now propel itself down through history as a collector's item. So see Pearl or Ami to be separated from your $10 and become a member of this wonderful society, which is going places and doing things. I think that covers it. Someone had a hand up. No, just a wave. Okay. Okay. I've been told after my debut last meeting that I should stick to the notes this time. This was handed to me. If you're a senior and would like to find out about the county's Dial-A-Ride program, come to the senior luncheon here Friday, March 1st at noon. Friday, March 1st at noon, there will be a presentation about the Dial-A-Ride program. So that's our community announcement. Program notes. You can tell I'm reading. Our next potluck program will take place on Wednesday, as always, April 17th, right here, 7 p.m. at our community house. In honor of the Messenger newspaper's 25th anniversary, our program will cover the history of the Messenger, as well as 2 previous Topanga news publications. The Messenger's current staff will be here, along with many past editors and staff. We've sent our tentacles out, and we're dragging these people in from all over. Part 2 of 50 Years of Art in Topanga, featuring artist Megan Rice, I don't know if she's here to correct me, has been postponed until October. Watch for information about our upcoming picnic program, which will take place in July of this year. So we're looking at newspapers, picnicking, and then art. For more information about upcoming programs, please contact our program director extraordinaire, Mary Bloom. Would you stand up, Mary, so they know who you are? Tonight's speaker is local archaeologist Chester King. Mr. King has an extensive experience studying the archaeology of California. He received his doctorate in 1981 from UC Davis. His dissertation, The Evolution of Chumash Society, provided a detailed chronology of artifacts used in areas historically occupied by the Chumash and their changes in response to the evolution of society. Wow, it's almost a dissertation alone. Mr. King will talk about the history of native cultures in Topanga during the last 10,000 years. We asked him to keep it brief. And about his experiences doing archaeological studies in Topanga. Most recently, in 1999, Mr. King directed an archaeological survey of lands administered by the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy east of Topanga Canyon Boulevard for the National Park Service. On a personal level, Mr. King will share his early experiences visiting his grandparents in Topanga during the 1950s and 60s, and about his first experience in archaeology, which took place in Topanga in early 1960. So with no more further ado, that being quite enough, I'm going to introduce Chester King.
Some handouts, and Mary said there would be about 50 people here. So you're going to have to share them. I don't know if there's about 100 maybe. If so, then if you could double up or something. I guess we could just start. You can survive without the handout. But it's kind of a substitute for slides and things like that. Sure, okay. I guess I'll start out talking a little about how I got to be an archaeologist and how Topanga has something to do with that. My grandparents bought in Hondo Canyon, where I live now, in 1946. And they moved out here from North Dakota then, because the majority of their children lived in the LA area. And after they came out here, we came up here pretty much every weekend, usually always Saturdays and often Sundays, to visit and to cut firewood and things like that. And my grandfather, he talked to us quite a bit, taught us how to skin rabbits and had us read National Geographic and various magazines he had around the house. And mostly, really got me interested in the natural world. And that's pretty much why he decided Topanga was a good place. So, anyway, when I got out of high school in 1960, I went to Santa Monica City College, and I hadn't done much socially before that, but I decided, well, I guess I'm going to have to be something, and I'm either going to be a paleontologist or I'll be an archaeologist. So I went to the geology club and the anthropology club tables, and the anthropology club had artifacts from the tank site up at Trippett Ranch laying on the table there, and they said that they were digging up there every weekend. Well, I didn't have to even think. I just knew, obviously, what I was going to be at that point. And from that time, I have never done any kind of employment other than archaeology, which I don't know if that's good, but at least I have definitely been an archaeologist for quite a while now. Also, so my grandfather talked to us a lot about where he lived in North Dakota when he was a child. The Sioux Scouts would often come and visit and eat there, and he told us about how light they were, and also they were supposed to have been the first white people that heard about Custer's last dance when the Crow Scouts came by and told them about it. So I was always kind of interested in Indians, and if you're going to study archaeology around here, I pretty much thought it was studying Indians. So I was interested in learning about California Indians, I guess ever since 1960 when I realized I could study archaeology here. I guess that's enough about me. I've done a number of kind of research topics, and actually the first one I was going to do for my dissertation was a study of distribution of population in California. I wanted to map where all the villages were, know what their names were, know what their population sizes were, and try to kind of explain that in terms of their locations and try to explain their distributions. But this got to be a rather big project, and I'm still doing it. And also, the head of my dissertation committee had done a similar kind of study, but less thoroughly, and it probably wasn't wise to do that. So I decided to do something else, and it was a result of I'd written a couple of articles for the Handbook of North American Indians, and been looking at the importance of trade in the Chumash area, and in doing an article on protohistoric and historic archaeology of Native people for the Handbook of California Indians, I went to Berkeley and looked at the archaeology collections there, and I went to the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History and looked at the archaeology collections there. And I was mostly looking just at that late time period, say from 1542 when Cabrillo sailed in up until the Spanish mission period. But of course, while I was doing that, I looked in the other drawers and saw what there was. And I saw that I could pretty much probably have burials representative of all of the time going back for at least about the last 3,000 years. And so I decided, well, and similar studies have been done in Central California where people had looked at burial lots and organized them according to their time sequence. The first person that did this kind of study was Sir Flinders Petrie in Egypt, and he was studying the pre-dynastic history of Egypt. And of course they had thousands of burials from various cemeteries, and they were able to look at the burial lots and see which ones had the same kinds of things with them, and then which ones had different things with them. And by looking at the other contexts of things, they knew which things would be later and which things would be earlier. And he could see how things changed over time. And in Central California, James Benioff had done a great deal of research to do the same thing. And besides California, James Benioff, which was, I think, his real stronger research, he did go for a while and help them organize the archaeology sequence of pottery in Mexico at Teotihuacan, and I believe his sequence is still important there. But anyway, I started looking at charts that Benioff had prepared for Central California, and I've been looking at the burial beads from some cemeteries that we'd excavated here, and beads that we'd excavated out of living sites also. And it was very clear that the beads from different time periods were easily distinguishable in terms of the frequencies of the types and the actual presence of particular types. So I knew that I could probably use the collections at Berkeley and at the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History to discover the sequence in this area. And the first page on my handout sort of shows the sequence of the periods that I was able to define, and the other side here sort of shows the most common beads that are found during those time periods that are shaped. And there's a lot of other beads. But it does show you that there's changes in numbers of types over time. And what I became interested in was seeing how you could explain the changes in terms of changes in the social systems that they were used in. Some of these beads are found only with really rich people in one area of a cemetery, and these are probably mostly the chiefs. And particularly beads that are purple and real hard to make, that have a lot of design on them and that are very small, are beads that are usually used mainly by the central political leaders. Other beads are found all over in cemeteries, all over in villages, and were used by everyone. And in particular on this chart, the beads that are, well, there's like a bead made from the callus of the Aldabella shell that's money in the late period. Those are found everywhere in all areas of cemeteries. And so anyway, there's some beads that are more like money, and there's some beads that are more like jewelry. And so you can see within beads that are more important for maintaining political relationships, and other beads that are important for just use as money. Clam beads are more often somewhat political. Anything with color tends to be more something that fancy up social stuff with. So anyway, I learned something about the sequence of time, and from knowing this, I can go to most sites, and if I find a few beads or the refuse used to make the beads, I can often get a pretty good idea of when that site was used. If archaeologists actually go to the site and dig it, they usually recover fairly large numbers of beads, and I often do studies for archaeologists that find beads like that in Southern California. The next page on the handout shows another thing that I got interested in. And all of these things are sort of at the same time, but this is really something I think I've been more interested in lately and have been developing more and more ways of trying to learn about it. And that is the foods that are used by the native people in this area, when they're used, and which ones are the more important. And ultimately, I want to study how, see if we can define the fields where people encouraged particular plants to grow and where they gathered those plants, and relate those to the total use of the landscape by the Indians. And there's various techniques that we can use to discover this. There's little parts of plants, they're called phytoliths, like the hairs on the plants and things, that are actually made out of opal, and they're made by the plants. And these parts, when the plant dies, decay into the soil and become like little particles of sand. And if you take out all the sand from the soil and sort it, and there are ways you can chemically sort it to some degree, but ultimately you're down to the point where you're looking at the different pieces of opal, and you can see, if you have knowledge of what those pieces look like in the living plants, what kinds of plants are growing in a particular area over time. So this is this, and then also looking at the soils to see if that the plants have been burned frequently in those areas or not, gives us some clue about the management techniques. A lot of the seed foods that are grown in this area, that after they're gathered, the people burn off the fields to keep plants that would be flowering later from developing, trying to keep, more of the plants they want growing in the areas. So anyway, this shows something about what we know about plant use in the area, and according to the seasons they're gathered and some of the categories of plants. The most important plant in the Santa Monica Mountains, what seems to be the staple plant, is yucca. And this may not, a lot of people think it was acorn or something like that. And acorns are darn important, but they aren't probably as important as yucca. And we find yucca ovens and sites where yucca is gathered all over the semi-hills in the Santa Monica Mountains, especially on south-facing slopes where yucca is most common. And yucca is gathered, it's pretty much the first big food to be gathered in the year. As we go through winter here, and depending on the rain sequence, yuccas will start blooming. They'll start swelling to bloom in March. And somewhere in March or April is probably when they're usually gathered. I've seen years where it didn't rain until April, and it rained hard, and the yucca pretty much before that decided it wasn't going to do anything that year. But because of the big rain in April, we were getting yucca flowering in June and July. So, none of these things hold perfect. There's going to be changes from one year to the other. It depends a lot on rainfall. Some years you may not have many yucca bloom at all. And other years it's just, really wild out there. They want to gather the yucca before it blooms. They cut the plant off at the base, and they cut the leaves off. And the leaves are very important for fiber. They use them for fish lines. It's probably the hardest fiber that you might have. It's equivalent to any rope that we use. And they would make fish lines and fish for deep rockfish and things that are several hundred feet down using yucca line. They also used yucca to tie their boats together. So yucca was important as a fiber, but even probably more important as a food. When Cabrillo was stopped at the village of Magoo, the people there told him that their corn was named Wep, and Harrington pointed out that Wep is the name for yucca, and what he was saying essentially is their staple food is called yucca. So if you ever go out to Magoo, I was out there after the fires. We had fires here in '93, and I think the fires out there were about the same year, either 1 year before or after, or the same year. And out there, when all the sage and sagebrush is burned off, it looks like the hills were planted with yucca. They just look like a pineapple field or something when you're out there after the fire. It was almost like they were regularly spaced. And it's interesting that out in Arizona, they found fields of agave that were planted by Indians 3,000 years ago, which is about the time when all this seems to start around here, the important use of yucca. But in the expeditions that the Spanish had through the mountains here, on the Portola expedition, I think it's like 4 out of 5 times they were given yucca, and the other time they were given seeds. But, and of course, Cabrillo was given yucca in December, and that's not the season you're gathering it. So yucca is very storable once it's been partly cooked. And when you eat it, it's sort of like, you eat it sort of like eating an artichoke. You have the bases of the leaves, and you eat those, clean off the stuff, and then you get to the heart inside, which is the bud, and it's sort of like a big sweet potato or something. It sort of tastes like, sort of a little bit like cooked pineapple if you cook it a long time. It gets really sweet. So it has a lot of sugars in it when it's cooked right. Anyway, all of these plants have various ways of processing them and such, and it seems that many of these plants were used over a long time period, but we don't have, the yucca may have only been used mainly in the last 3,000 years, but there are ovens that might be yucca ovens that are up to 7,000, 8,000 years old in the Santa Barbara area. We need to do more study on the contents of carbon in ovens. Also, along with yucca, often they cook the blue dicks and the soap root right in the same pit and the same fire, and we find pieces of those in the same ovens that they cook yucca in. They also make steam vegetables and things, greens in the ovens too. We found some concentrations of pollen in one oven that sort of indicated there might have been some like mustard greens and that sort of thing being cooked in the oven also. So the ovens weren't just used for one thing, but when they made them out in the yucca fields, that yucca was probably the most important. Now, I'm going to jump to another whole topic. Topanga is a name like Cahuenga, Cucamonga. There's a number of other Engas around us here. Topanga. Most all of these names have an Enga on the end, and that means place of, or it's a locative thing. In the Uto-Aztecan languages that are spoken in the Serrano language, in the Garbileño or Tongva language, in the Tataviam language up in the Santa Clara River area, and I think also down in the Luiseño language, and I don't know about the Cahuilla. But anyway, they all use a similar ending to indicate place. And what's interesting is because of that, a lot of people have assumed, well, Topanga has a Uto-Aztecan ending, and therefore is a Uto-Aztecan place. But that's maybe an assumption that should be thought about a little bit more. There are several things that indicate that it's a Chumash place. And one is that the names of the men, there are 3 men who are described as being fathers of Topanga children in the registers at San Fernando. All of those names end in wheat or shet, and those are endings found on Chumash names. So that's a sort of indicator. Also then, when you look up those names in the register and find what are probably those people, I think a couple are from Malibu and one is from Talapoc, which is Las Verenas. So those men seem to have come from Chumash villages and probably been married here. The other thing is that the village of El Escorpion, which is almost due north of us, out in Bell Canyon, is most commonly in the register at San Fernando also with an Enga ending. But it also occurs under the name Wam, which is the Chumash name for that village. And that name is also given one time at Ventura, where a man from El Escorpion is married in at the village of Ventura. And Harrington gave it, the Wam was the name for El Escorpion. Also, the names of the people from El Escorpion, a lot of them have L's in them and are very typical Chumash names. Garbileño names don't have L, they use R. And it's sort of like Chumash doesn't use R very much, and it uses L. So that's sort of a clue. All of the marriages at El Escorpion are to the west, to Las Verenas, to Puc at Westlake Village, to El Conejo, out Thousand Oaks, and to Tapu Canyon up in Simi Valley. So again, it seems to be mostly a Chumash village. Well, when we look at mission registers from other areas of California, for instance, if we go up to San Rafael, when they start recruiting people who are Pomo, they've been recruiting people who are all Coast Miwok up to a certain time, and then they start recruiting some people who are Pomo from up in the Santa Rosa area. And when they first come in, those villages are under their Coast Miwok names, not their Pomo names. Later on, they come in there's a mission up there further than San Rafael. Anyway, the furthest north mission. They come in there under their Pomo names. So often when you're in a village, when they reach a boundary, and most of the people at the mission are speaking one language, the name of the village on the other side of that boundary is often given first under that other language. Now, I I just received an email a couple months ago or a month ago about the name Topanga. And linguists have been kicking this around for some time. And one linguist who used to live up here in Topanga was Bill Bright, who taught at UCLA. And I think now he's out at Colorado, but he's still emeritus at UCLA. And he writes, I don't know if I can read it here, that there's a name for Topa Mountain up in north of Ojai. And he says that the name means brush. And Topa, in Chumash, when you say something twice, like Topa, it means a lot of Topa. There's a place name that we found probably the location of out near Piru that's Shosho. And Sho is tobacco, so it means a place with a lot of tobacco. And it's the only place I've ever seen it. But, I mean, real native tobacco growing by itself. But he says that Topa means brush. And so he suggests it might mean brush place. And I kept trying to look through all the Harrington Note stuff I have on place names, but I don't think I have it. I need to go and look it up. But I believe that I remember Harrington saying that Topa referred to a kind of milkweed. So maybe it's a kind of milkweed. But anyway, what the linguists seem to be in agreement is that the root, Topa, is not a Shoshonean word. It doesn't seem to fit in there any other. The TU is not found in Shoshonean languages, is what they essentially conclude. And this looks like maybe a Chumash word. So maybe the root of Topanga is Chumash. But Harrington didn't have anybody who knew about it. He didn't have anybody that knew what Lost Furnace, that it was Telepod. He had people give him other names. The people didn't do very good on place name stuff in the Santa Monica Mountains because the people he had that he talked to weren't as familiar with the Santa Monica Mountains as they were with other areas. It seemed like mostly he didn't find many real Santa Monica Mountain people to talk to that still remembered anything. So we're kind of in a historic hole out here. But anyway, it's just sort of interesting that no one really, everybody will tell you what Topanga means. There's something in an historical society thing that they reference here. But the linguists say no, that's jumping to conclusions about words that aren't really the same. And that it isn't the same. So, unfortunately, what seems to happen is that at San Fernando Mission, where the people are baptized from this area, except maybe one that's at San Gabriel, there is a Topanga there, and the child is baptized from here, but he's burned here, and they don't get him in the burial. I mean, they sort of say, well, we didn't get this one. So, but it could be another Topanga. There may have been another Topanga somewhere else. In the margin on that one, it's written San Diego or something. But I don't think so. It's probably from here. But anyway, there are very few baptisms listed from Topanga. The only ones that are given at San Fernando are pretty much the ones of these children. And then the parents are later from Malibu. But what happens at San Fernando is that if you look at the registers from Ventura, you see a lot more detail. And at San Fernando, they pretty much just say anybody out in this direction is from Malibu. And I know in Topanga, we had some t-shirts that said Topanga is not Malibu. But the missionaries didn't even know that. So you know, for their purposes, if it was up to 300 people, it was fairly easy to keep the records just by names and just having one location rather than having 5 or 6 locations that were heavily intermarried and everything. It was much easier just to lump them all together and say, well, those are all the Malibu people. So that seems to be what happened, actually. That we don't, if we had the priests from Ventura at San Fernando, they would have given us much better records. The San Fernando priests weren't interested in ethnography. And that was true of a lot of priests, but there were a few that were. The handout, I just threw together some things here. Um, the first picture is the only rock paintings that I know of in Topanga. And these are all up here in Santa Maria Creek in one rock shelter, and they're all just right within a small area. This one here is kind of at the bottom. It's bigger. These lines are rough as they long. And then this is up in between, and it's really hard to see. And this black one up on top here, it has the most detail over here, but you can see it was once a fairly long strip. Similar paintings are found in a lot of rock shelters, and some of these may be just no more than wallpaper in a sense. They're geometric designs on the wall. They may have other meanings. This one in the middle is like a kind of a red net, and some places are kind of filled in with more detail. It's really eroded, and there's some other red net ones just like this from up on Boney Mountain and other places. I mean, not just like this, but they're just like this in that you can hardly see what they are. and one person, Tom Hoskinson, who's real interested in studying rock paintings and things, came up and took pictures of these, and he said he thought they looked really quite old. The rock shelter they're in was used up into the historic period. So, you know, these were found by a Topanga local, Dan Larson. You know who he is. And he was up there in 1964, I think it was, or 63. I think it was 64, with a field school from UCLA. And he was digging down there, and one day he looked up on the wall, and he said, "My golly, there's paintings here." And no one had even seen them before that. And we've gone up there, and if the light's not on it, you can't see some of these. If the light's on them, they're there. And it's really quite a miracle that only... So we were going up there in the early morning in the summer, and that's when we got these pictures. But I can go up there with you, and I can't find them. You know, I mean, it takes me a little while. I said, well, now that's the rock where it is, but you can't even see it. This I played with a digital camera in my computer to try to like enhance the black for the black ones, enhance the red, and decrease other things so that I could get rid of the noise. Now, one thing I want to talk about here is sort of, I mean, I've always thought it was real interesting to study Indians, and I had kind of a positive attitude about Indians. But, you know, I realized that in our culture in America, that there's different forces. And if you realize that all the private property around here, which is very sacred when it comes to developing it, is all essentially just made up by governments doing new treaties and saying, oh yeah, that's your land now, you're a European, it must be yours. But you know, if somebody were to go to court on all this and they had a world court, they might look at it differently, because in the Santa Monica Mountains, for instance, the Tapia was given the Malibu land grant in, I think, 1801. The Indians were still out in their villages here until they were finally recruited in 1804, 1805. Tapia had the native people of Malibu. We dug their cemetery. He had them riding horses, carrying guns, which they weren't supposed to do, either of those. But, you know, and the cemetery is filled with cow bones and boot buckles and spurs and things like that. So, you know, these Indians were cowboys before they went to the missions. And there's an interesting account by Father Santa Maria when they're going out to found San Fernando Mission. And this is in 1795, I think it is. And he says that from this point, and he's at Cayugas, up north of Thousand Oaks. And he's at that village, and he says from this point south, and he's including all the way to San Pedro, the Indians go dressed in sandals and basically dressed as Mexican peasants, and that they do all of the things that are necessary to run the ranches. And when he goes to the site where he found San Fernando Mission, there's a whole group of Indians working there and living there for Reyes, who is the alcalde in LA. And he describes that these Indians were doing, you know, tending flocks of geese, they're herding all the different animals, they were irrigating all the different fields, And also on the same expedition, he goes up to like near Griffith Park and down on the river there, and notes an Indian who's his own fields there, and it's kind of like a sharecropping relationship, I guess, with Verdugo. So the Indians here did not go to the missions to learn to be white people, or to be agriculturalists or whatever. They had already gotten that before they went to the mission. When they were taken to the mission, they weren't allowed to go back out to their own land without a pass. If they did go out without a pass, they were called runaways, and they would send soldiers out to get them. But if you didn't go to a mission, the fathers didn't have any control over you. And what's interesting is that the ranchos of Dominguez and Nietos down in the harbor area, they were founded, I think, in 1784, 85, right when LA's founded, pretty much. And when they're founded that first year, each of them give a certain number of children as converts from those villages, and they're often sponsored by the people who got those land grants. But after that date, there's almost nobody recruited from those villages down there. And it seems that they all just get to live there as non-Christians and work for the ranchers. And then when they finally closed those villages out, it seems that the Indians had been brought from the islands, and that they were the ones that replaced them as the field workers. And in the Malibu area, it seems again that they brought Indians from Santa Cruz and Santa Rosa Island over here, and that those were the Indians that Fernando knew as Malibu Indians. But when they're baptized at San Fernando, they're baptized as from Santa Cruz and Santa Rosa Islands. So the Indian workers, and they're going out, in other words, beyond where the missions recruit, and sometimes recruiting people to be the day labor people. The Spanish and the Mexicans were totally against doing labor. So, all of the things that are built, like the missions and the presidios, were all built by the Indians. So the Spanish didn't believe in doing that sort of thing themselves. They were here at a place where they had Indians to do it for them. The next page here just shows some artifacts. The top three are from just things that we found on the surface out in Santa Maria Ranch area, which is the conservancy land we surveyed in 99. And the bottom thing here, and it's big. It doesn't go with a scale. It's about this big around. And my dad found that in Hondo Creek, where I live. And it's an unfinished mortar, and it's made out of rhyolite, which is a big cobble that eroded out of probably the Topanga Formation or the Sesame Formation. And this cobble was so big that you can only lift this up. You don't want to carry it, even across the room here. It is not truly portable yet. And it would have taken a great deal more work to make it portable. And apparently, the Indians would work these where they would find them in the creek. If you found a really good cobble for a mortar, you just work it down to a point where then you could probably carry it. And this one hadn't gotten to that point. There probably was some reason they decided not to continue working on this particular mortar. But this is quite interesting to me, because before I thought maybe the mortars were more localized in terms of finding sources and having quarries. Like if you go out on San Miguel Island, there's areas there where they're making mortars and pestles, and where there's all the blanks of them, and it's like there's whole specialized areas. But it seems that around here, a lot of them are just found and then made and then taken back to the villages. And then they're used in, often placed in cemeteries, and they're also traded as trade items. But that was interesting to me to see, that people wouldn't take the mortar blank back to the village to work on it. And it really makes sense. If it was a mortar this big, I think you could take it home. In fact, in sites like at Talipop, Las Verenas Creek, we found, on the surface even, small mortar blanks that are in this size where they're definitely portable. But these large ones, I would guess you could probably find them in any creek up here where there's big culls. I don't know, I don't think my dad found it where it was being worked. But if you did find where it was being worked, there'd be a lot of stones that would be battered on, that would be the hammers that were being used to make it. And I would like to find a place like that. Okay, then the next page in here just shows some bedrock mortars. And these are all bedrock mortars that are up at the Santa Maria Creek Conservancy lands. And I might say that what I'm going to go into next is kind of a little bit more about the destruction of things around here and why it's so difficult to save anything. But right where these mortars are and right above the rock art, the Conservancy has put a trail with a picnic table. And this area was already receiving quite a bit of use, but it probably didn't need to be encouraged. We were partly doing this survey so we could help the Conservancy plan the area. We hope to meet with them sometime and discuss the idea of planning. But it seems that they built a lot of trails out there, some of them going through sites and things that we'd actually been out recording on. The bottom picture here shows a series of mortars. There's either 5 or 6 of them in a row. And that row seems, it's like it defines a line. They're all on a line. And it is oriented at something like about, I think it was 340 degrees, which means it's sort of west-southwest. And I don't know, one of the fellows who was recording it was thinking, well, maybe that was pretty close to the alignment for the winter solstice, that the sun would be setting on the horizon somewhere west-southwest. And it's true somewhere out there. I don't know, I always thought maybe it was a little bit further south. But it might be that you would find some relationship like that. Some of these do. Some of them may also be maps of stars and things like that show you how the other things are organized. So not all mortars are just used to grind acorns or whatever in. And of course, a lot of mortars are used to grind pigments and other things besides food. The next page is one of Topanga's sad days. This is up at Oakmont, and it has a new name now. But it's those Malibu-like houses that are up on the other side of View Ridge, I guess it is, kind of up in there at the headwaters. And up there they bulldozed, well, it depends how you define them, but at least 2 sites. And we were out there, I worked with Rosemary Woodlock, who was with the, it's the Mountains, one of the conservancies. Mountain Restoration Trust, I think she was working with them. But again, she just had volunteer time and it didn't work out. But, this guy, Mr. Groupé, was the developer on this one, and he just could lie to anyone and get whatever he wanted. He obviously owned the government because these 2 fellows here with their dirt bikes, we believe, were probably policemen. And they were probably there because of us. And I've been with Indians in cases where we had unmarked cars driving around and various shepherds seemingly on the landscape and various other kind of strange things. It's kind of weird how our government reacts sometimes. But you do have to realize these are Indian things. And when you think about how basically all of the land in the United States, and especially California, where there's no treaties, there's no deeds that transfer in, like in Pennsylvania, that people were required to buy the land from the Indians. They may not have always done it fairly, but there was at least some paper. In California, there's no paper. The only paper is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that says we recognize the lands owned by the Mexicans. And after we chopped those lands down to a reasonable size so that there could be some homesteading land, of course, there was even less. And now, in the homesteading land, of course, I don't know where that really came from, but somehow it was government land right away. And anyway, I think it's partly because if Indians were real people, we couldn't have private land ownership, according to the idea that you buy it from somebody and not buy stolen goods. And so I think that Indians can't be real people in America because they're the people who had things taken from them, and if they were real people, that couldn't have happened. So somehow, like when Reagan was president and he went to Moscow and the students asked him about Leonard Peltier and the Indian troublemakers in the United States, and Reagan said, well, we should have gotten rid of that problem a long time ago. There's still a lot of people with that attitude. I worked in Malibu, and pretty much all the city council had that attitude. And it's sort of like these Indian things shouldn't be in anybody's way. They shouldn't have to bother with them. They should just be able to destroy it. So we don't have the same kind of historic preservation we would have, say, in Denmark or England or something, where the people actually have a myth that the country is their country, where they actually have a heritage. In America, we don't have that belief. I think it's sort of more like, let's take what we can, move on. And so it's more of a colonial attitude here. And I think until we become a civilized country, we're not going to have a chance saving sites. And I don't quite know how to make that happen. But it's just very sad what happens. So anyway, we have Group A bulldozing sites there. I have pictures of other things like this happening in Topanga. Then the next page is right down here at the center in Topanga. And we just recently had a big development put in there. And I promised them that I would never go there, and I haven't. But anyway, there's several things that are showing here, and they don't even relate directly to that. One is an artifact that was found back in 1933 or 31 in the post office area, and that was with a burial. And then the other thing is up on the top here. We were out there. I was out there one day with some Garbarleño people, and I was showing them how to find archaeological sites. And we stopped there, and this is right next to the telephone pole for the, I think you maybe see the telephone pole in one of these pictures here. But right where the sign is for the end of the 7th grade. And this is in the creek bank there. And we saw two pestles sticking out that were laying parallel to each other. And this kind of thing occurs on house floors usually. And this is in a shell midden area, which is also typical of where houses are. And this, somebody, I don't know if it was one of the Garbarleños or somebody they talked to, or if somebody else just happened to be walking along and looked up there and saw, oh, those are two pestles, I'm going to collect those. Anyway, somebody collected them and they left the site. But we see, continually there's road work, there's all kinds of stuff happening in that site. When Joe enlarged the market down there and he dug into where the trees were planted, those were parts of the site that were intact. There's still parts of that site intact, probably especially like under Bubalina and under that lip of the highway where it's higher. And I don't know if that's when the site was used yet. We don't really have enough information done by archaeologists. They haven't like screens and collect beads and that sort of thing enough there. We know it goes back in time, but I don't know if it was used historically. And it very possibly wasn't. One question is, where is Topanga? And I'm sort of starting to suspect it's probably at the beach. And it's probably in the land the state park just acquired. And I would say be vigilant, because if you want to save it, I know a lot of people are worried about what state parks will do down there, and I would worry about it. Because again, in state parks, if we look at how history preservation is managed, they have what's called the Office of Historic Preservation, which is which has also the Historic Preservation Officer at it. And under federal law, those are the people who are supposed to try to help us save our history. And unfortunately, if the development people in state parks want to develop something, they tell that office to make it developable. So, and also state parks has probably the largest number of archaeologists on its staff of any agency in this state, and that's done to control them.
Justin, could I interrupt for a second? We had a gentleman who came to the meeting, Mr. Black Bear, who is a local Chumash Indian in the canyon, and he is on a tight schedule but wanted to say a couple minutes worth of words to the audience.
Okay.
And with your good graces, I'll make that an introduction and allow him to speak.
Okay.
And we're going to need to wrap it up by about 9.
Okay. I think I'm getting there.
Okay.
I just have one or two more sad stories. Thank you very much for your letting me interrupt you. Stay on up here.
This is Mr. Black Bear from Topanga. Thank you.
How are you? Really, I just stepped up to the podium because I wanted to say first of all, I want to thank you for studying my ancestors' past. Although I really want to say that the Chumash people were still in existence. We are still living and breathing. And although like all of you, you have ancestors, grandmothers, grandparents, etc. that have left pottery and lost. Oh, my grandma says thank you for finding her pottery. But anyhow, we are still here, and my people are very much alive. And what do we do for the future? You know, the Chumash people love this area. I personally live here in Topanga. And Topanga, to me, I call it home. And as my neighbors, I would like to say that if we could only work for the future as well as concentrate on the past, it'd be great. Because a lot of people forget about the future and we only concentrate in the past. And although we have a lot of stories, and if anybody ever wants to sit down and talk about my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and their pottery, I find that fantastic. But I wish that somebody would sit down and say, how are the Chumash doing today? How are the Indian people of California doing today? All of the tribes are still in existence and people are still alive. The only difference is that we have Christian names now. Some people have Martinez, Gonzalez, and stuff like that. And the Indian people are mixed, they say, with Mexicans. Well, Mexicans are Indian people as well. So when we talk about the Mexican people and we talk about the Indian people of this land, you're talking about one and the same. And I think it's very important to educate people, to give people information that is true. And if we ask the people that are in existence now, maybe we could tell you the stories correctly. You know, some of the stuff that's been found in the area, I mean, my people are very grateful, but there's only one problem that we've had, is that once they find this stuff, it's not returned to us. It's not, you know, it's like it belongs to the Chumash, but the Chumash can't have it. It belongs to the Shoshone, but the Shoshone can't have it. So, when you find things like this, now what? What can we say about it? We ask the government to give us back our stuff, and they say, no way. So right now, my people are concentrating on living today. We have issues today, very important issues. And they're not just Indian issues. They're issues that belong to all of us, about our culture, the air we breathe, etc., etc., etc. And I said I just would make this quick. Don't want to bore anybody. I just want to say hi to my neighbors. I have an Indian brother here that's very close. I've seen him many a times, and he's sitting there very quietly, but I know we think the same. We have issues now. We have living issues. I come from the coastal band called the Swordfish family. And we have gatherings, and even to have powwows, sometimes we have problems. Because we're told we can't do powwows, we can't have gatherings. Shh, not here. But then we look in the newspaper and we have something like, we have a Shumash meeting. So what I wanted to do was to come and represent my people, to say thank you, Topanga. Thank you for being so nice. I've met so many of you on the street and you guys just say hi. Real nice people. Chester King, thank you very much. You know one of my uncles, Mr. Jim Garcia. My brother is an archaeologist as well, Theron Wayne. So, people of Topanga, thank you, but talk to the Shumash. We're here, we're alive. The Shoshone are here and alive, the Tongva. Many of the people, we're still here. We talk about the past. I mean, you have grandparents, I have great-grandparents. It's fine and dandy, we can sit in over coffee, but the fact of the matter is that we are still here. Nobody discussed the fact about, how about the living Shumash? Can we have coffee today with a living Shumash? Say, it's always about the past. But when the living, breathing, say, I have something to say. Shh, not now. Tomorrow. Some other time. Don't make sense. And if you don't believe me, come to some of the meetings. As soon as but don't forget about the future. Because the future will soon be the past. And we'll always long on what we did wrong yesterday instead of doing the right for the future. Thank you.
I was just going to finish with I had my last page here is an example of something we saw during our 99 survey. And this is a knoll top that is partly on conservancy land and partly on privately land. However, the private people who own the one part are using the other part also, and they bulldozed this road through it. And they use it to dump the horse manure on top of this hill because kind of like away from everything, I suspect it has less problem with polluting the creeks and stuff. But, you know, in Topanga, those people that have a lot of horses have horse manure problems. And we found a number of sites where they're just using the site areas to dump that. You know, and that may not hurt an awful lot, except like when they're bulldozing, but maybe there's an issue of respect too, you know. And I think it just kind of shows the arrogancy of people who know what's right. You know, even my father, he's bulldozed sites. And I told him that's wrong, but he knows it's right. It's his ability to do that allows him to do it. It's bulldozer fascism or whatever. But, you know, I think that if America's ever going to be mature, people are going to have to learn they can't just take everything they want. They have to leave things that other people own, and they have to respect the rights of others, because otherwise we're not going to be a country. Even if they blow up trade centers and get us united with fear, we're not going to be a real country. And we won't be a real country unless we have a past. And the past has to be more than just land grabbing. And, you know, it would be nice someday if people would say the living Indians could control their past and say this shouldn't be private property anymore, this should be under the control of Native people. And maybe out at Amundsen Ranch that will happen. I know there's some moves that may result in Native people getting control of that land as a public land, but as land that they can manage. Things like this are happening here and there, and maybe little footholds can be realized. But you know, what I've found is mostly very sad, working as Malibu archaeologists and finding out how America works, sort of, with the degree of corruption and control of people that want to make a lot of money, that it seems they can't be stopped. There's one case in Malibu where the fellow even figured out how to make money off of destroying the archaeology site. He had me write a report saying it was a really important site while he was in escrow. He then went to his escrow, you know, to the seller and said, well, look at here, I have a horrible problem with an archaeology site. you'll probably have to discount me a couple $100,000 on this. I'm sure he went to him and did that. Then after he discounted him, he got himself an archaeologist that was guaranteed to roll it over, the same one used at the center in Topanga, who went and asked, do you know that Chester King? What do you think of him? Well, he's an SOB. Yeah, you're the one we want. Okay, so anyway, it's like the system is very corrupt. I don't think there's any archaeologist hardly that does independent work that is clean. I mean, there's some that are a lot better than the others, but the bottom of the bucket makes the worst archaeologists, when I start, look like a shining example of a good scientist. Today, because of CEQA, there's no university that really wants to sponsor archaeology. One of the universities, Cal State Northridge, said that it was fine for them to destroy these sites up at Oakmont, and he fought us all the way through, writing letters about, and not only that, but recently an archaeologist was asked to verify if an artifact was an artifact. He went out on a site that was being developed, and the developer ended up suing, and he got that same Cal State archaeologist to write a letter about why the archaeologist was so bad to go on this private property and see an artifact. So, unfortunately, the UC system and everyone else doesn't want to be in this dirty business, because it's a very corrupt business where not only the archaeologists but the Native American monitors are often in agreement that sites should be destroyed. I went to a Coastal Commission hearing where some Chumash people from Ventura got up and argued that their ancestral site should be destroyed. And I had never seen anything like that before. But the system is bad and has gotten worse. There are a lot of Native people who are trying to control those other people, but there's no way in our society to really control those other people, legally at least, and there's really no way. It's sort of everything is loose. The same with the archaeologists. Once I wrote a protest letter to the Society of Professional Archaeologists about some archaeologists that had written off site up by Loyola, and they wrote me back and they said, don't complain about these people. You're being unprofessional to question their ethics. And this was an archaeologist who had written off all the sites down by Loyola, essentially. He did that whole ridge there. And that was, probably half of LA's archaeology heritage destroyed within the last 15, 20 years here. Recently, just pretty much, they have one parcel they want to destroy, 2 more sites on the West Bluffs. And there are people fighting to protect it, and we can hope they'll win. But it's a rare day when we do.
I hate to interrupt.
I'm all done.
What I wanted to propose was, I'm sure there's people that want to ask questions or would like to talk to Mr. King. So would you be willing to just stay for a little bit and kind of continue? But we have a lot of seniors that want to. Okay. People want to start? We promised them that let it go at 9, so I'm going to call the meeting, and then open it up privately for questions. I want to thank Mr. King. Let's give him a big hand. We've had quite a range of discussion here, from some pretty heavy academic stuff to some pretty heavy political stuff. But I think in Topanga that's all good and fair. I do want to encourage anybody that wants to stay to come on up and continue with Chester King. And I also want to encourage anybody that needs to get going to go ahead. We have people that have to clean up, etc., and people with children and seniors and whatever. So we'll try to accommodate everybody. Thank you very, very much for coming, and we deeply appreciate your attention to this society.
I'll get them. Take things out.
Let's live in a hideout in Topanga. Come on, let's head out to them hills. Lots of stained glass, cold water in the bath. We can live without those fancy frills. Let's live in a tree in Topanga. Maybe in the leaves they'd leave us be. We could live in a squirrel hole and play our rock and roll. Come out on the limb and you can't be a nut like me, yeah!